Hello, sixth grade English. I hope you had a wonderful Easter break, and I hope that you are ready to begin a new novel unit for the remainder of this school year. So, for today, I'm going to introduce you to a novel that we're actually going to begin a little bit later this week, but it's very important to understand the background behind what you'll be reading later. Are you ready to find out what you're going to be reading? All right. So the new book that we're going to begin is called The Witch of Blackbird Pond. Now, I will say this because I think it's important to note that even though the title involves a witch, the book itself is not actually about a witch. All right, so there's nothing to worry about as you start to read this book. However, it is important to understand the historical context of this story and why there is a witch in the title. So, today, what you're going to do is you're going to follow along with me through this PowerPoint presentation that introduces you to the novel and the background. And after that, you will be taking a little quiz to make sure that you were following along and that you were able to understand the details that we discussed today. All right, let's begin. So, The Witch of Blackbird Pond. So this right here is the cover of the book that we have. Now, just a quick note, since we are not at the school and we don't have the physical copies of the book, you will have to be reading the book online. Now, there might be times when I might do Zoom video calls in which I will read a chapter out loud, and you can hop on and join me in that Zoom video call so that you have some time to read along with me and ask any questions that you may have. Or I may be posting links to YouTube videos of somebody else reading the book, and I will definitely be sure to send you the PDF of the book so that you can make sure to read that on your own as well. So there will be ways to read this book. Even though you won't have the physical hard copy of the book, you will still get the chance to read this book. All right, so take a look at this cover right here. All right, and as you look at this cover, I want you to ask yourself these questions. What can you tell about the time period of the story by the girl's clothes? All right, as you can notice, the clothing that she's wearing is not exactly something that you would see today, but in the days that she lived in this time period of the book, this was a very common attire. So, what time period do you think this is from? Also, what does the girl's expression, her facial expressions, what does it tell you about her feelings? Do you think she's happy to be where she's at? Or do you think she is a little disappointed? What do you think? Also, why do you think that she's out in the woods? And what do you think the story will be about? All right, so let's begin. So, The Witch of Blackbird Pond is actually an example of historical fiction. Now, just to let you know, or just a reminder, a fiction book is an imaginary story. So that means that the characters in the story are not real. However, when you talk about history or nonfiction, that is a true story. So the characters and the events actually happened. Now, this book is very interesting because it's a little bit of a combination. It's what we would call historical fiction. So what that means is that the story itself is fictional, and the characters and the events are made up by the author. However, the setting, which means the time period and the place, are historically accurate. Okay, so we are going to be in a real place that exists on this earth, and the time period is a time that you do learn about in history class, especially when you learn about American history. So this would be called historical fiction. And later on, when we read more in this book, you will learn about certain characters that are in this book. They're not major characters, it's more like small minor characters that are mentioned, who are real historical characters. All right, so that's just an interesting note to keep in mind. All right, so what is the historical setting in The Witch of Blackbird Pond? The story takes place in colonial America. So this is when America was first being established by the English colonists. Specifically, the year is in 1687. Now, Kit Tyler is the main character in our story, and she travels from Barbados to Wethersfield, Connecticut, in order to live with her aunt and uncle, who are Puritans. And we're going to tackle all of those different details a little bit more later. All right, so here's a picture for you of Barbados. It is a beautiful beachy area that is just south of the United States. So that is Barbados right there. And here is colonial America in Connecticut. As you can see, during this time period, there were factories that were starting to be built, and lots of ships and ports by the sea. And just a quick question for you. If you had to choose whether you wanted to live in Barbados or here in Connecticut, which place would you choose? All right. Well, you are going to find out what Kit prefers. Again, remember that she grew up in Barbados in this island-like area, but then she moves to Connecticut, and you're going to see what it's like for her as she makes that transition between those places. All right, here's a question for you. Does this picture here look familiar to you? All right. Well, if it does, it's probably because this is a picture of the very first Thanksgiving. Just a quick refresher on that. This was back when the Puritans and the Pilgrims came to live in America for the first time, and they had a very hard time living in the new colonies. They didn't quite know how to plant their different crops. And thankfully, there was a group of friendly Indians that came to help them out. And because these Indians took care of the Pilgrims and showed them how to live, they were able to have a really good harvest of food the following year. And so they were able to work together, and they had a great feast together, and this was the first Thanksgiving. So some history questions for you to consider. Who are the Pilgrims and the Puritans? Where did they come from? And why did they come to America? All right, let's talk about this. So the Pilgrims and the Puritans, they originally came from Europe, which is mostly they came from England, but there were some other countries from Europe that they came from as well. Back then, everyone had to believe what the king believed. So if you did not believe what the king believed, then you were persecuted, which means that you were punished or you were mistreated. So a group of people wanted to separate from the church because back then the church was in agreement with the government. And so anyone that did not agree with the king and the way he wanted to worship God, they were going to be persecuted as well. Okay, so these people wanted to kind of separate themselves from the church because it was also so closely tied in with the government. So these people left Europe and moved to America. Here's a picture for you of what Puritans would look like. So hey, as you can see, this outfit is very similar to the outfit that we saw at the cover of the book that we'll be reading later. All right, so this is what a woman would wear, and this is what a man would typically wear. The Puritans first came to America in 1629. Now, Puritans, unlike people that wanted to separate from the church, the Puritans were people who wanted to purify the church. So they just wanted to make the church better. They wanted to make it more holy and more reverent and respectful to God. So they thought that the church in Europe was too worldly, which means that they were not really following the Bible according to what they were supposed to do. And the Puritans, did not like excessive jewelry, which means too much, and they did not like fine clothes either. And so as you can see, they wore very simple clothing, black and white. They didn't have really fancy, vibrant colors. That was one of your vocab words yesterday. So they didn't have a lot of vibrant colors. It was basically dull, kind of boring outfits. All right. They wanted to be simple people. So they wore simple clothes, and they did not have a lot of decorations in the church. Now, let's move on to witches and witchcraft. So witchcraft is the use of magic powers. So a witch is a person who has received these powers powers from evil spirits and uses them to harm people or their property. All right. I will make a quick note that yes, this is a real thing. As you know, we live in a time, we live in not just the physical world, but there's also a spiritual world that surrounds us. And as Christians, we believe that God is God and we are to follow him. But anyone who does not follow God and chooses to follow the devil is choosing to work against God. And that is exactly what a witch does. A witch is someone who receives powers from demonic spirits or the devil, and so it is a thing. They do have power, but their power does not come from God, and so their power is for evil and not for good. Okay, but there is nothing that we as Christians need to be afraid of because the Spirit of God lives within us, and the Bible says if God is for us, who can be against us? So there's nothing for us to fear because God is stronger and greater than the evil spiritual forces in the world. However, in Europe, there was a huge fear of witches. So during the 1600s and the 1700s, there was a huge fear of witchcraft all over Europe. Thousands of people were accused of being witches, and then they were executed or killed. So there were also a lot of tests that were used to see if somebody was a witch, and it's kind of interesting because these tests were not really logical. For example, one of the tests, which you'll actually hear about in the book, is that they believed that if you threw a woman into a river or into a lake, and if she was able to float, that meant that she was a witch. But if she drowned, that meant that she was innocent and pure and she was not a witch, but oh no, she died anyway. All right. So it was kind of a really crazy situation, but that was what they did back then. So this fear of witches went all the way from the European countries all the way to the American colonists. All right, here's an image of a court scene that would have occurred in which a woman would have been accused of being a witch, and there are others who are trying to give accusations of moments that they saw where they thought that she did something evil, and then the judge is sitting right here to determine if she really was a witch or not. All right. And this is just another image of what a scene like that could look like. All right, so the fear of witches in America. Now, in a place called Salem in the state of Massachusetts, there was a famous witch hunt that happened. So there, the colonists, which means the people who lived there, executed 20 people, and they also imprisoned 150 other people that they thought were all witches. All right, so again, this fear was an all-consuming, widespread thing. So the court, which means the place where you would bring someone to be heard by a judge, it was not very formal. It was not structured or orderly. It was very informal, which means it was very simple, and the people just kind of made the decisions however they felt like making the decisions. So it's kind of interesting. The judge would allow gossip and rumors and even children's stories against their own parents to be used as evidence in court. All right. And we know usually that when somebody is being accused of something, you need more than just verbal evidence. You need to find, objects or something that was found at the scene of the crime to really state that somebody was guilty, right? Anybody can just say a story. But in this instance, they did allow just stories to be used to accuse people and condemn them to jail. A lot of innocent people were accused or they were killed. All right, so at this time, I'm going to show you a video that was made on YouTube. Now, this says the Witch of Blackbird Pond trailer in quotes because it's not an actual trailer. There's no movie about this story. Someday I hope there will be because it is a great story. But somebody took it upon themselves to just create a trailer that would show a little bit about what the place would look like, what the characters would look like, and what they would be going through. Okay, so take a look at this trailer that I will post for you on the Google Classroom site. And then after doing that, it'll give you a little bit more of an idea of what this story entails. And then take the quiz with the comprehension check. Now you are also able to look over this PowerPoint again if you would like to do that in order to answer the questions. You can also email me with any questions that you have. And there we go. I'll just make this big screen again. Email me with any questions that you have, and I look forward to starting this book with you soon. It's one of my favorite books, and some of the sixth graders last year, who are the current seventh graders, have also said that it was one of their favorite books as well. So I'm excited for you to get into it. All right. I hope you have an awesome rest of your day.